A Sky News investigation has uncovered the harmful impact of long delays in transferring acutely mentally unwell prisoners to mental health facilities. The government's target is 28 days, but some inmates have said that they've waited almost a year to be transferred. It means prisoners with illnesses such as psychosis and schizophrenia are often being left in solitary confinement while their conditions deteriorate. A warning, this report from Alice Porter does contain descriptions of self-harm.
Bryony was just a normal university student, but she developed mental health problems, and in 2017 she was arrested for malicious communication and attempted arson. She had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Bryony, not her real name, went to prison.
When you're psychotic and depressed, being locked away in a cell is one of the worst things you can do to someone. I started to self-harm because we were allowed razors in our cell. It was basically a way to cope with my surroundings. It was the worst experience of my life.
Self-harm in women's prisons is at record levels. Now a new report reveals the extent that acutely unwell prisoners, both male and female, will go to hurt themselves. In a report exclusively seen by Sky News, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons says some mentally unwell prisoners are so driven to harming themselves they have removed teeth or maimed themselves to the point of exposing their own intestines, frequently causing life-changing injuries. But prisoners are waiting long periods before they reach hospital. NHS guidelines stipulate mentally unwell prisoners should be transferred within 28 days from that need being identified. But 85% of prisoners are not transferred within that deadline. The average wait was 85 days, with one person waiting over a year.
What we come across is cases where prisoners used in effect as a place of safety. So out in the community there is no provision in place for someone who's very unwell, and therefore sometimes magistrates or judges will send them to prison simply because there's nowhere else for them to go.
Sarah Reed had schizophrenia and was imprisoned solely for psychiatric reports to be obtained to confirm whether she was fit to stand trial. Her mother says Sarah was kept in isolation, unmedicated. In January 2016, she was found dead.
She'd be looking around and waving around saying, "Mum, I need my meds, I can't sleep." She also had these two black eyes that were, when I saw, I found it shocking. She just looked to me like she was suffering. "Please, please get me out of here, Mum." That was the last thing she said to me.
The government says providers in prison have clear processes in place to identify, assess and treat offenders with mental health needs, and NHS England is investing in post-custody care. After 6 months in prison, Bryony was sent to a psychiatric hospital where she finally got a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
I don't know if getting arrested and getting sent to prison was the right response. It might have been more beneficial if I'd been taken straight to hospital, and prison just made illness 10 times worse.
Bryony is now back studying at university, but for many of those who remain locked away, it's still a long wait to get the help they need. Alice Porter, Sky News.
Well, if you or anyone you know has been affected by the issues in this story, you can call the Samaritans on 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Well, let's talk now to the General Secretary of the Prison Officers Association, Steve Gillan. And Steve, the fact that there are people with serious mental health problems in our prisons presumably is no surprise to your members. What impact is it having on them?
Well, it doesn't come as any surprise. I mean, this is a scandalous report, and Charlie Taylor is quite right to highlight some of the issues ongoing, because it's dreadful for those mentally ill prisoners, but it's dreadful for my members as well, having to deal with it with inadequate resources and training. They're not there to deal with mentally ill people. That don't get training for that. And it's a stain on British society that we're not diverting people away from our prisons in the first place to those psychiatric units. But this comes no surprise to me whatsoever, because it was as far back as the 1980s when the Thatcher government introduce care in the community and effectively shut down those important psychiatric services, and it clearly didn't work. And the jails in England and Wales now have become a dustbin, effectively housing people that should clearly, that are mentally ill, that should be diverted away in the first place.
You say you get no training, that training is inadequate. What training do prison officers get on dealing with those with mental health problems?
Well, they get very little training. I mean, the training for prison officers is effectively 5 weeks at a training school, with 2 weeks before they go and then 2 weeks after they come back. So the ongoing training is very poor. And I speak from experience. When I was a prison officer at Chelmsford Prison and Pentonville, I never received any training on mental health issues. All my training, it was effectively in that arena, was self-taught, and it was totally inadequate. And these poor people end up in isolation, as Charlie Taylor has identified. They become disruptive, they become violent, and it's my members that are left picking up the pieces. We've got vastly overcrowded prisons now, bursting at the seams, nowhere to divert these people to. And the reality is, I mean, I think the report said, and I've not read it in full as yet, because it's quite a detailed report, it says only 15% of those assessed are actually sent to secure psychiatric services when they actually need it. The rest are left in isolation, and Charlie Taylor highlighted some issues that he'd seen at particular establishments, which just shouldn't exist in a modern British society. We want a prison service to be proud of, but you need to equip POA members, prison officers, the brave men and women that keep our jails and the public safe. You need to give them the tools to actually deal with what they're facing, and it's no use just locking up people that are mentally ill as a last resort, because there's nowhere else to put them. It just isn't right.
And of course, the treatment that these people get in prison is different to hospitals. And my understanding is that if they're in hospital, they can be forced to take medication, but that is not the case in prison. And of course, we heard in our report about one young woman who wasn't taking her meds when she was in prison, and she then sadly took her own life. I mean, essentially it means that prison officers are not only managing people with mental health problems, but they're managing people with unmanaged mental health problems often.
Well, you're absolutely right on that. You know, there's certain rules that prison officers have to follow, and we can't make people take their medication if they don't want to, unlike in secure hospitals where they've got to. And of course, these poor people are then left to their own devices without the adequate medication that they so need. And I've seen it myself through experience of people that are clearly mentally ill, that are disruptive, probably through no fault of their own, because they're not getting the care and treatment that they actually need. And that puts pressures on prison staff up and down the country. And they've already got enough pressures as it is without this. And we should actually be ashamed as a nation that this is happening in our prisons, because there's absolutely no excuse for it. I mean, the courts, rather than releasing people on bail, are actually remanding them in custody, those that are mentally ill, and they're just not getting the treatment.
Steve, do prison officers treat people that you think have mental health problems? Do prison officers treat them differently? If they sort of think, actually, this person's here, they're actually very ill, they may have committed a crime, may have not committed a crime, but we can tell they're mentally ill. Do they treat them differently? Are they more lenient, perhaps? Are they more caring, perhaps? Can they be?
No, prison officers are very professional people, but the reality is, when you're facing someone that's really mentally ill, we don't treat them any differently from any other prisoner, but the reality is they haven't got the training in order to deal with those individuals that clearly need treatment. They need to be assessed within that 28-day period and moved on to those psychiatric hospitals where they will get that specialist treatment that they need. We don't want to see anybody self-harm or kill themselves in prison simply because they're not getting the treatment that they deserve. Prison officers themselves suffer mental health issues as a result of seeing others not being well, and again, you know, this government or any government in the future or previous, they need to deal with this real urgent issue. And I'm pleased that Charlie Taylor has come out and addressed it, because we've not seen any inroads in the Mental Health Act since 1983. That's a travesty.
Steve Gillan, General Secretary of the Prison Officers Association, really good to talk to you there. Steve was referring to Charlie Taylor. He is the Chief Inspector of Prisons. We're going to be talking to him at about 3:30 this afternoon. Stephen, good to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.